Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sunday edition of the True Life Podcast. We are here with some very incredible individuals, in my opinion. We might as well go around the horn and let themselves introduce themselves to people who may not know who they are. Ben, why don't you start off, my friend? Where can people find you? Who are you? And what do you want to say?
My name is Benjamin C. George. I am the BenjaminCGeorge.com is my website. Sorry, I have an echo feedback here, so I'll cut it there.
Jason, maybe
All
you
right.
can.
Yeah, Jason, you can find me at experienceintegration.com, same Instagram handle. And I'm excited to dive into this conversation tonight and just see where this thing goes.
Absolutely. Paul, or should I call you the Stig?
Yeah, Paul's good. You can find me here on Sundays at 2:00 Hawaii time.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, I had an interesting conversation with a guy yesterday who started up his own church. Now, when you think of church, you think of spirituality, you think of religion, you may or may not think of psychedelics. You may even think of like Jim Jones or Charles Manson or some sort of mind control. However, this guy started the Church of Silamathoxin, and we got into a really deep conversation about how the psychedelic experience in a church setting can actually help people solve a lot of trauma. And I know all of us here have had some experiences with psychedelics and have all had some spiritual experiences with it. Paul, what do you think about the psychedelic experience under the umbrella of a church?
Didn't we talk about this last week?
Oh, maybe. Do you remember what we said?
The psychedelic experience with a church. I don't know. It sounds confining.
Hmm.
It's like, pre-set up type of thing. I am all for like psychedelics without structure. I'm not into like the shamanism and the, whatever coaching and the rest of that stuff. It just seems to me like if you're going to throw a church into the mix, it's even more constricting. I think I said this last week. I think it's a personal journey, and good or bad, I believe it's something that people, should try to work through themselves. Seek their own answers, process their own experience. That's kind of where I am.
What do you think about that, Jason?
I don't know. I kind of have to agree on some levels, Paul. Like even being someone that does sometimes do coaching with people and whatnot. I think that if there's too much influence by an outside source or too much influence of a structure that it has to be a certain way, that all of a sudden I don't know, you're kind of setting constraints around the mind when you're trying to break those constraints. That I think there could be some cause of just concern. Like, okay, what is this about? But I think on the other side, I could see where there might be some people who need some of that structure because they're dealing with their lives so unstructured through trauma or through various things. Like their outer world is so fragmented that to actually do the work with this medicine, they need somewhat of a container to then heal, to then break the container is almost more, I feel like. But if that container never gets broken and you think you can only do that work within the confines of a church or through the confines of a shaman or whatever, I think you've missed the point.
Yeah. I think like some people, like within their first, like, one or two experiences with it, like coaching, that might be beneficial. But, I think as you get into it and you really start to, continue to use it, that stuff, isn't necessary, and it's something you should be doing on your own.
There's like a difference between like the medicine and the magic of this stuff. The medicine needs the container. The magic is like go on your own and like freaking figure it out. Like if you want that magic, like go for it. But if it's medicine, maybe, I don't know if that's a delineation that we could draw between the two.
What about this? Like, I kind of think that this is my opinion, and I think all of us have read a little bit of research on different ideas of what's happening in the brain when people take psychedelics, but it seems to be a consensus of neurogenesis. So I think maybe in the beginning, people that may be fragmented, I think the first couple sessions are going to cause some sort of neurogenesis and allow you to think more clear. I think it's going to solve a lot of problems in the way you think. And after that point, and I would go with the medicine magic theory, where the medicine is the first couple times where you're repairing your brain. And maybe you only everybody's brain is different. Everyone thinks different. So the way your brain is going to be restructured through psychedelics is going to be different to everybody. Yeah. So I think that those first few times, even some big doses, is going to be the repair mechanism. After that becomes the integration. Like that's when you can go a little bigger. You can go a little stronger when you've identified the shadow, when you've identified some of the terrain and the situation outside, then you become more comfortable. But yeah, I think that maybe there's something to be said for, people. It's not like it's easy to do. If you're going into the psychedelic experience, you're not a little bit afraid, then I think you're doing it wrong. Like there should be a little bit of fear in there because, you're going to lose control. You're not going to be able to control your thoughts for a little bit. And for some people, I would scratch that. I'd say for most people, that's a very difficult thing to let go. We're so caught up in holding on to things. And that could be the reason why we go a little crazy, is because we're holding on to things in the past. We're holding on to things in the future. We're holding on to unrealistic expectations. And so letting go may be the first part. And then the second, getting later down the line, I think that might be the actual neurogenesis that happens. What do you think about that, Ben?
Well, I don't know. I think, when I think back towards my first time, because I've been a pretty solo journey in all of this.
Right.
And, in fact, all of pretty much my entire journey was relatively a solo journey. It was very few times that I met anybody else along down the path that, I actually, had a ceremony with or tripped with or did anything like that. But, I think we're treading in dangerous waters when you start to use words like churches. I think what happens is, we have this propensity to radicalize things pretty damn quick, it seems, as humans. And church is one of those things that's been easily radicalized, pretty much throughout recorded history that, as far as we're aware of anyway. And I think, it's very easy to all of a sudden get somebody who, is very fervent, and then all of a sudden you end up with a few sycophants. And then even if that's not your intention, you've kicked off something into the zeitgeist of the world. Now, even if you don't facilitate that, they will find somebody who does. And I think it's a dangerous game. I think it is meant to be a self, kind of a journey of the self. It's the hero's journey, but it's very much one's ability to reflect, into the abyss and into that dark mirror and persevere and come out the other side. If you have somebody whispering suggestions in your ear along the way, if it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to just achieve some therapy, I think that could be beneficial. If you're trying to actually, I think we should probably delineate, this is probably your medicine and your magic, right? So if you're talking therapy, medicine, I think that is one thing. And I think if you're talking the magic, the path, kind of enlightenment, I think that's an entirely different thing. So long about way to say I agree.
I mean, I don't. Is there a difference between the medicine and the magic?
Yeah, I think so.
I think for me, it started off as magic.
I think if
we're going to use those words, then and then it was medicine, like down the road a little bit.
Why was it magic when you started off?
Well, I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about age here, but I was doing this stuff in the early 90s. Is when I started using psychedelics, and it was the party. It was to have a different experience because we ran through all the other drugs. And so, this was like, hey, psychedelics, let's try. And some of my friends started before I did, and it wasn't long before I was on board. And then it was just like, it was just about having fun. But then there became a point where it was like, yeah, it was cool, like, you know the trip was fun, and the hallucinations were great, but it was, it became this thing where it was like the conversations that were on the other side of the peak, and then starting to deal with life through the lens that I had been developing while using these psychedelics became the medicine, right? It became totally changed the way that I viewed the world, totally changed the way that I viewed myself, and my friends and my family and everything else, But at first it was just like, hey, let's have some fun.
I think you're going to get a Venn diagram. You're going to have a little bit of overlap from the medicine and the magic, and the just general experience in life, kind of all in that Venn diagram.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It reminds me of like a kid who plays with a toy sword. Like, you give a kid a toy sword and they're playing with it, but they're playing with it because they're training with it. It seems like the use of psychedelics at a young age is a sort of training with things. Like, you're having fun with it, you're learning. And the more you do it, the more you realize how useful it is. Like, if I have a toy sword, I'm like chopping my bookcase or chasing the cat, But then as I get older, I'm like, dude, I can flick around the butterfly knife like it's nothing, or I can use it to peel an orange in a round, or I can use it to throw at a bullseye. The more you use anything, the more practice you have with something, the better you get with it, and the more you understand its use cases. So, and then another point I want to kind of bring up is when we think about magic, like, what would magic be to a pharaoh? What would magic to be a caveman? Now, magic in the past, or a good definition, like technology can be magic, right? And magic is often a word we use when we don't understand something. When we don't understand a technology, it's magic or it's God. So too might psychedelics be a technology. And I want to get your guys' opinion on this. I've been listening to a lot of people speak about psychedelics, and when I ask them, for example, I was talking to this guy who was running this church, and I asked him to explain to me what it is about psychedelics that is changing the way he thinks. And he gave like this really elegant answer in layman's terms that was talking about the thought process and how he's able to perceive things in different ways that he never has before. In fact, he felt like he could make new connections that were always there but never made sense. And it was he went on to explain it further in that way. And I thought to myself, what an amazing way for someone who's not a neuroscientist to explain neurogenesis. Like, how can that be? How can somebody who takes psilocybin or these psychedelics begin to explain exactly what's happening in the body without ever taking a science course? Like, that's a pretty amazing thing. Have you guys noticed that? I bet has anybody else noticed that?
Definitely. I think I read this book which described the relation between Vipassana meditation and science, right? And so the practice is Dhamma in Vipassana, right? And they say Dhamma is the inner science of the mind, and science is nothing but the external Dhamma we perceive, right? So if what Buddha was doing was observing the internal sensations, and it was always responding to the external environment, right? So based on that interaction, he studied a lot of things that you were saying neuroscientist, that's a 200-300-year-old term that we came up with, right? And we have a curriculum and we have the set of things people do, but most of the things back then was just open-ended, and anyone was able to observe. They didn't need a degree to write something, right? It was just, yeah, this is what I'm observing. The distance between like sun and earth, or based on the shadows, having an understanding. I can't get the details right, but science has always been there. Just the tools have become more refined and also defined, so people know it just the same way, right? Like I think magic or medicine, it depends on the initial situation we get into, because with respect to psychedelics, I feel like we are this ignorant bubble which is just operating autonomously, and and this hits you because with ignorance you have a lot of boundaries, definitions, labels, And you might say this was a magic. I was using it in a music setting and so on. And one primary thing what psychedelic does is gonna take out this place that is defining things. So, oh, this could be anything, right? This could be a medicine. This could be a magic. This could be anything. And yeah, so I feel like people can, if they can observe and they can say things, that's magic, because we don't understand where that is coming from. That thought or that ability, that is it's not just talent that is observable in some people. It is there within each of us, right? If only we stopped and listened to experiment with how it's done, the observation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That makes me, it brings me to the conclusion that, it seems to me that science and spirituality or religion have always been connected. It's not until maybe 100 years ago or a few hundred years ago that they became so deeply separated. Maybe what do you think, Jason? Like, you've had experience in the church, being in it, being out of it, being in the psychedelic realm. Like, what is your take on the connection between spirituality and religion? I mean, between psychedelics, between science and religion. I'm sorry.
Totally. Well, so what I was thinking a lot about was the idea that there's the inner knowing and there's the outer knowing. And I think through psychedelics, you can begin to learn how the mind works. You can begin to actually see the reality. You can, observe the universe and have this deep intuition of knowing. And I would say that many of our ancient ancestors had that. They had a deep, deep connection to a science, if you want to call it that, to technology and to spirituality, because there was a shared oneness. And that's always been, I think, the perspective of the mystics, if you're going to look at it, of this deep understanding, whether it's through astronomy and astrology, whether it's through these other observable tools, and you have intuition with it. And then I think through modernity, we said, oh no, the only way we can know is by the scientific method. The only way we can know is through, an outer perspective. And so we began to perceive the universe from an outer perspective and trying to equate and really dividing and dividing and dividing. Like Alan Watts talks a lot about this, has a brilliant video of just this idea that, what we've done is we just keep going deeper and deeper to the molecule. Like we separate every time we go deeper, it's a separation. And really we need to step back and see it as both spiritual and science, and quit playing these games of division, because I think at the end of the day, they don't really serve us. It feels like that separation, a binary world, when we truly are living in a non-dualistic reality. So I don't know.
No, that's awesome. That makes tons of sense. It does make sense. I think I've heard the metaphor, like if you look at a microscope and you zoom into something, like you can see something smaller and smaller, but then you zoom in and then it breaks apart again, and you got to you look closer and closer, and there's that cycle of that. And I as above, so below.
Exactly.
I can see how society is fragmenting that way, and if we can see it that way, then maybe that's what's happening now. Like, I know we've talked about it before, but it seems as if we are pulling back like the tide from this world of specialization. You all of a sudden there was this time where you had to go to school to be a scientist, and then you wanted to be what kind of scientist? You want to be what kind of a doctor? And there's just a smaller and smaller breakdown. And it's weird because it seems to me like the biggest discoveries come from people who are not in the field. Maybe because they have a different understanding of, maybe they have the big picture. What do you think, Ben?
Perspective. I think, in terms of the magic and spirituality and science, science is just labels that we define of repeat observations, right? Things that we can repeatably observe over and over again, and get everybody else to agree with us that, look, you can see this too. In that sense, magic has always been kind of losing a bit of its mystique to science and its process and the labeling and all of these things. But I think what we are seeing is that kind of, the reemergence of the combination of all of these things. People are now starting to ask real questions. we're not, people just aren't, people are asking why. Why should we listen to you? Why does this work? Does this still stand up in the world today? And along that path, we're seeing this massive explosion of psychedelics. We're seeing this mass movement. Look how fast marijuana got legalized in over half the United States, practically. Now, obviously, there's a lot of money incentive behind that, but at the same time, there is, growing up in the 90s, you would, or in the 80s and then into the 90s, you would never expect that to happen. It was, they were throwing everybody in jail for just a little bit of weed. And then all of a sudden, fast forward 15, 20 years, and it's ubiquitous. So I think we're seeing kind of this movement. And I think, when you're getting that psychoactive experience, when you're opening your mind, now people are, putting those threads together, and they're seeing that there isn't these lines of delineation between the magic, the religion, the spiritual, the medicine, and all this stuff. There's overlap between all of them. Yes, they all have, kind of separate paths, but they're all entwined amongst each other.
Yeah. I heard I think you brought this up a while back, Ben. You had spoken about how psychedelics may help solve the mystery of the placebo. The idea that our beliefs about something can have radical effects on our biology. And I'm wondering if just the way people are explaining psychedelics, like if you go on LinkedIn, if you go on Reddit, if you go on YouTube, everyone's talking about psychedelics and spiritual experiences. Might it be just the fact that everyone is talking about psychedelics in a spiritual nature that is causing people to have spiritual experiences? What do you think, Ranga?
I think the quote that comes to my mind is that we are not human beings having spiritual experience. We are spiritual being having human experience, right? And yeah, I think that's the part that comes to my mind when you say that. And with respect to your thing about everything happens in thought, I got really crazy after my psychedelic trips to having this thing, how much of our illness is psychosomatic, right? And then that's when I came across that asthma was one of those things which I really thought was physical, was purely psychosomatic, right? And you don't need to have a puff. You don't need to take in steroids to control it. It's here, right? So likewise, one of the research that started off in 1960s was, is cancer psychosomatic, right? And I get this deep intuition every time I'm on psychedelics that it is on a cellular level. There is a lot of reaction that is happening, and cancer is just bunch of cells. It doesn't matter bad cells or good cells. It's, once they grow in number, once they become it's like radicalization of our beliefs, like church, as you mentioned, right? It's something like that, and that kills us. So are we able to stop reacting at that level, right? And my partner was texting me, she's seeing this, I think, and she was we just had this topic of how neurogenesis might be working, right? And neurons that fire together, that wire together, because so many detachment happens during psychedelics. So when you're sobering up, you either choose to go back to your habitual pattern, or now something is happening different in your head, right? You're not able to visualize it or anything. It's more of a practical practice that develops over the course of time to be intuitive at that level of changing our way of thinking.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean,
Go ahead, Paul.
yeah.
What you got?
I mean, I'm just kind of adding on to like the magic and the spiritualism of hallucinogens, and I think a lot of it was like, in my own experience, was like it was really humanizing for me. It like brought me back to what I would say was like a more like, I don't know, not really primitive, but like an early form of myself before, like, the Western world grabbed a hold of me when I started school and started changing and forming me into a person that was detached from the earth. And so when I started using these substances, what happened was I realized that there was magic all around me, like the flowers on a plant, the structure of leaves, the tide coming in and going out, the stars. It would have always been magic around me. I just never saw it that way. It was always kind of felt like I was detached from the planet. And, so then that was a real spiritual, realization for me, being able to see those things for what they were, and not for, what I was taught with it, what I was taught that they were.
Yeah, I'm curious. What do you think that, like, it seems that the psychedelic substance has the ability to open us up to what is possible, for us to see the reality and the beauty that is all around us. And it kind of like it has an opening property to it. And on the flip side, it seems like SSRIs have a narrowing property to it. Like if you think of modafinil or all these ADHD medicines, it kind of seems like they have a narrow, like they're there to help you focus. But what is focus? Focus is narrowing down your ability to see the big picture. You're going to focus in on something. You're going to look at the small things. And if the drugs we've been taking allow us to have more focus, doesn't it also mean that it's narrowing our view? What do you guys think?
I don't really know anything about those drugs. I mean, I don't. One of my kids is pretty hyper, and his principal was like, "Oh, maybe he's like ADD or something or whatever," and I kind of flipped out. But I don't even look at those types of things. And if anybody ever suggested that I need to put my kids on those types of drugs, I would tell them to go for a walk or something.
I think you might need to put one of your kids on those drugs.
Yeah, right.
I'm just kidding, damn it.
So I was watching this episode of Gabermate with Joe Rogan, right? And he was saying about ADHD, where many experts believe that it is physical. It is not. So what's happening with ADHD is pretty much this person is zoning out, right? And when you're faced with the stressful situations, you have either an option as a fight or flight, right? As a very young kid, when you're completely dependent on your parents and the parents are not helping to reduce stress, or in a very stressful environment where the parents are all fighting, or any kind of stressful situation, right? The only option the kid has is to zone out, right? 10 years later, that becomes a observable habit pattern, which is then labeled as ADHD. But it was nice seeing that video, because there is a report that says that before ADHD became a label, I think after it became a label, the cases just shot by it wasn't there. Before, people used to observe that in kids with maybe extreme hyper, right? And now when the label is introduced, the standard goes less. It's like anything can be classified kind of stuff.
It's like I have a copy of the DSM-5. I like to look through it sometimes just to see all the new diseases. And like there's like gender dysphoria is like, that used to be a disease, but now it's not a disease. It's weird how we have these different labels, and those labels instead they create the labels create the disease. You know what I mean? It's like, here's this thing, you probably have it. And then people are happy to put themselves in that container. Yeah, I do have that. That's me. You're right. You're describing me. It's like they're looking for an identity, and here's a bunch of doctors getting together labeling people. It's kind of an interesting thing.
It's right in line with the placebo effect as well.
Bingo.
Same with astrology.
Right. Yeah. As you're sitting here and focusing on that, and then all, they call it hypochondria in medical parlance, right? But you're enacting the same mechanisms at the physical level that are responsible for the placebo/nocebo effect, and you're invoking those when you're listening to those doctors who label it. You're listening to those commercials on the television. Is this you? And that. So I think a lot of it comes into that kind of dichotomy.
Yeah. As we're talking about like the psychedelic space, let's like shift gears for a minute and talk about this idea of creating. Like, what do you guys think about this idea? Like, what if we if I know Paul looked up some papers, like there's so many talented people in this space, and I'm talking to a bunch of them right now, but I think that there's people we could really help out, like this girl Abigail that I was talking about, or anybody who's publishing a paper, or people that any of us find interesting. Like if we brought them on this show on a Sunday, and each one of us, I think we all come from some different backgrounds, I think we could put together content worth listening to that people would get excited about, and it would serve multiple purposes. It would help all of us get some questions answered. We like talking about it. It would help the guests that came here get their whatever message they wanted out, be it a paper or a something they're starting. And then from after the Sunday show, then that individual guest could come on each one of our individual shows. I think that would help amplify the system. I know Paul was worried about it being more of an echo chamber, but Paul, do you think it would really be an echo chamber? You think everyone would be talking the same stuff? What's your contention with it?
I mean, I just think, I don't know, after I went on to that, Abigail's, I have a ResearchGate account because I've authored paper.
Nice.
On, in the scientific community on honeybees. And so I looked her up, and she had she's got 2 published, 1 co-published, 1 on her own. And I started reading them, and they seemed like, like she might have something interesting to say about, some of these things. But I guess when we were talking about doing this on the chat, I started thinking about like what she co-authored isn't really a lot different than what a lot of other people are out there doing already. And so, I have a problem with like people who are trying to like drive messages, That's the main reason why I push back on like coaching and shamanism. Like I said, I don't have a problem with shamans, I guess, really. But, I just, I kind of think it's like, it's one of those things like when I was talking about like vegetarianism and veganism and getting hijacked, where like, or like, like Yoganandis are now like Western people and Buddhists are, are Western people, and not that I have any problems with any of that. It's just I just see kind of a commercialization and and like a steering of like like this is the way we need to go. These are the ways that we need to be thinking about things. It's like when Jason was talking earlier about using psychedelics and now being able to see how the mind works. I've never experienced that. Like I've never seen how my mind works on psychedelics. I mean, it opened up to me, possibilities, but there was never like, oh, now I know how my mind works. And it's, it's kind of, sometimes it's stuff like that, that's like, gets like, hey, this is what I'm teaching people. This is different. This is separate. Come to me, give me cash, or, do something for me and I'll help you out. And, I'm kind of like, I'm not into structure really.
Well, and that's where I think the danger of calling things church comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you start to have those conglomerations or congregations or whatever, what have you, then you end up in those positions where now you have somebody who, just as humans, you get that natural little kick when everybody's watching you and you're saying something, right? And then, for a lot of people, it seems to turn from a little, oh, that was a nice feeling to, oh, I'm the Messiah. And, that it seems to be a pretty quick ramp for a lot of people throughout, even in modern times. And I think you add psychedelics to that equation and that becomes, supercharged. I think there's inherent dangers when you start placing these types of labels on things. So I really agree with you, Paul.
I don't really think like, and Jason, I wasn't trying to pick on you at all.
Oh no,
I don't
agree.
I don't know anything about like, like I visited your website, but I don't have any experience in what you're doing. But at the same time, I think people are going to get involved in this stuff at the wrong times of their lives. And maybe it's those people that need, coaching or help or something, and it just seems like, as a culture right now, there's just like this push, at least socially, for the use of these medicines, and to, like, you got to go out and have one of these experiences, or you are like, you're going to lose 1,000 followers on Instagram. You know what I mean? So, people may not be prepared. And I think if one thing that coaching could do is like actually, kind of go through the process with somebody just to make sure. Because like I said, when I started doing this stuff, like my friends had been doing it for a little while, and I was apprehensive, you know what I mean? I was scared. And then it was just like something clicked, and there was a moment, and then I was like, yeah, I'm going to try it. Let's do it. But none of my friends ever forced me to. And so I think when you are going to go down this path to start, using psychedelics, that kind of stuff could be valuable, talking to people and trying to get a better understanding on whether or not you are ready for it. But during the process itself, I don't think there should be any coaching around. But I mean, that's just me.
I fully agree, Paul. In fact, I think coaching is focused on preparation, integration, and cultivation, not the experience. And a lot of people do need to be told if they're ready or not. And if they're not, what does ready look like? And again, I can't define that for anyone, but I can tell them if they're not ready. Like I can be like, I don't think this is like, I don't think you're there yet. I think you might need to go do some other work first, and then be able to kind of come to this. But that's, again, just if you feel called to it, do it. That's honestly,
right.
Individual choice, I think, is the most important thing about this. Is
Absolutely.
Your choice. And if you want to do it, do it. And it will do to you whatever it needs to do to you. It's not going to kill you. So like,
you're proof of that.
Yeah, right. It's not going to kill it. All of us are. We're all here. We're all breathing. It hasn't killed us yet.
Same.
Your story was pretty like,
Yeah.
You told a story, Jason, of like, like if that didn't get any, if that didn't, put an end to me, then nothing will.
Yeah. So on some levels, I feel like I am hesitant. I think kind of the church thing too, I think is a loophole because of the legalities. And so they're calling things a church. And, it's interesting, in Colorado, we got Prop 122 coming up, which would decriminalize and create these healing centers. And I have mixed feelings about it because, these like, who's the money? Like, where's the money? Who's the money behind the healing centers? Who's the agenda behind the healing centers? Who's like, someone has an agenda. And so that to me is, again, I get nervous about that. Now, obviously, decriminalization would be great because then all of a sudden you're going to start seeing these churches disappear. They're not going to call themselves churches anymore. They're going to,
Right.
they're going to call them what they really are. So I think it's a little bit of a misnomer on some levels, but it's happening across. You see ayahuasca churches popping up all over the place. You see, other types of spiritual experiences really being shaped around these plants. So I don't know. It's interesting.
But George, like back to what you were saying about having guests that are like in the scientific community that have, degrees, PhDs or whatever, masters in whatever field that are using, psychedelics or are, doing research with psychedelics. I mean, it's interesting, I mean, I think someone like that could come on to this program and it might be interesting. I guess it depends on, how prepared we all are, really.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to having anybody on. I want to, what though, let me, like, as you guys were talking, I thought about this. I think maybe all of us are operating under the old paradigm of what a church is. And if you just stand back for a minute, I think you can see the transition or the translation of church changing right in front of us. Like, I think that, like you just said, look at all these churches popping up. Imagine what this country, like it used to, remember Junipero Serra, like walked all the way up and planted all these missions up the West Coast. Like it used to be that the church would go and plant churches to build communities. And there was all these churches popping up. But in a weird sort of way, we're seeing the resurgence of spirituality under the name of the church. Like I talked to this guy who's building a church, but it's not really the church in the sense that there's a pastor that stands up and preaches to everybody. Jason came from a church. And like, I think what psychedelics is doing is it is deconstructing the idea of the church as we know it, and it's almost like a decentralization of medicine in a way. Like the same way psychedelics is deconstructing the church, it's deconstructing medicine. And in the same vein, it's the wholeness coming together from the idea of like, God damn it, I just said this. What is that word when you get smaller and smaller and smaller? You become specialized. So the same way we're moving away from specialization, we are moving away from medicine. We are moving away from the church. And I think that you're seeing the church dissolve from the top down and being built from the bottom up. Because if you look at the consensus between all of us is like, yeah, everyone should be able to do psychedelics on their own. No one is advocating that they can't do it on their own unless maybe they have some issues that they shouldn't do it on their own. But all of us here have this consensus of like, yeah, I think there's a big part of it that's an individual journey. And I think that I see this growing space in the Christian churches of people turning towards psychedelics. I think that you're seeing the dissolution of the structure of the church only to be built back from the bottom up. And you're seeing these retreats happen. And I think that maybe the people that are in the church are people that need that structure. And the pyramid is slowly being built from the bottom, like it's being disintegrated a little bit. Does that kind of make sense? You see what I'm saying? Like the idea of church, the definition of church is changing in real time all around us. Does that kind of make sense?
I see where you're coming from. I think it's also important to kind of have the perspective that a lot of the reason we're seeing these things pop up as church is what Jason mentions, the legal perspective on this. If all of a sudden it was legal to just have an ayahuasca ceremony in the middle of the desert whenever you wanted, people wouldn't call it churches. They would call it all sorts of different funny names.
A party.
Right? for one, Burning Man, right? But we touched on this in prior episodes. Is that there's, especially in the modern age with technology, there's definitely seemed to be kind of a lack of spiritualness in the world, whether that be in the relative churches, just out in the day-to-day operations of things. And we noted that we see a lot of that void being filled by all sorts of different causes and movements these days. And I think this is an extrapolation of that. I think a lot of people are now looking around and asking, and now getting a sense that, hey, there isn't actually spiritual here. This is a church. I go to this thing. There's some community and whatnot, but the spiritual side of it isn't here. Where's that spiritual side of things? And I think that's why we are seeing a lot of movement towards psychedelics. People are trying to reattach with that spiritual side of things. And I think the moniker of church is an easy moniker from a legal perspective to make that transition.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
Do you think that psychedelics are a threat to the structure of church?
I think psychedelics are a threat to all structure. To your point, like
I'd agree. Yeah.
So I mean, I think, and so I think, yeah, like if you want to look at the traditional context of church, and again, that can mean a bunch of different things, right? I mean, I was the other day, I was talking to friends. There's over 30,000 sects of Christianity. 30,000 different groupings of people that say the way we do it is better than the way you do it. So whatever that is, right? That means there's all sorts of ways to think about church and like this thing. But the basic premise is that someone, pastor, clergy, whatever term you want to apply to it, has more information about God than you do. And so therefore you need to come in and sit down and submit yourself to that thing. And that thing is then going to connect you to the other thing. And then, that's how you build this structure. And I think, once people start to realize that they don't need that pastor or that clergyman to connect them to God, and they can directly connect to the divine or spirituality or whatever we want to call it, then I think its current structures will break down. I do think there will be a resurgence of people realizing that there's something about wisdom, and there's something about those that hold it, and that we can all learn things from wise teachers, but the wise teacher doesn't have a better connection to the divine than me. They just might be sitting around a different fire of the universe and have a perspective that I can take and add to my fire that'll help me understand this thing called consciousness, really, right? So yeah, I think it'll break down, but I think we're at such a breakdown of systems right now across the world. We're seeing all these significant systems be tested and under a lot of pressure. And the church, especially in North America, is under the same thing. And it's all going to break in a domino fashion, in my opinion.
So you have people that are churchgoers that are starting to, experiment with psychedelics. And then, of course, at some point they're going to start, questions are going to start entering their mind, in relation to like their experiences and how they are starting to see the world in a different way. Don't you think like some of those people are going to be going to their, their pastors or, their rabbis or whatever to go and seek answers?
Yeah, totally. I think that's going to begin. I had a priest come to me for some integration work, and it was really interesting. He was in the Orthodox tradition, and he was a monk and lived in Alaska, and reached out to me, and it was really interesting. We had several sessions, but unfortunately, right before he was getting ready to have an experience that I wasn't a part of, and then we would talk about integration afterwards, his father, whatever the guy above him, gave him feedback that this was not permissible, and he had to stop. And he had done it maybe 2 or 3 times and was just kind of continuing to go deeper. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And the fascinating thing is like a nun had told him about it. So this nun was like, you got to try this stuff. and it's, but the nun was in Croatia. Like, again, this thing is so much bigger than I think we could ever imagine when we think about it. What were you say, Paul?
So when does it go from like, his, person who's advising him is telling him that this is not permissible to finally, like anything else, when, the church begins to see like, oh, this is growing, and the message goes, to the priest that goes from, the message is this is not permissible to this is how you're going to respond from now on.
I don't know. Like, I think, again, it depends on which sect you talk about within this thing called, the Christianity from that perspective, right? Like, I think certain things will go faster. I think, Orthodox, Greek or Eastern Orthodox, they've been doing the same thing for about 2,000 years. So I don't see them changing anytime soon. Like, they're very, very true to their tradition.
Cool. I don't know.
But I think there will be an evolution. I think there's going to be to George's point. I think there's going to be a new church, quote unquote. Something will emerge from this death, right? I mean, it's the cycle. It's what you see, and frankly, this church has gone through this evolution many times. I think we gotta just very, very, very generally got to remember, this Christian thing was 300 years before it was formalized in any way. And the people came around, they're like, oh, let's formalize this shit because we can control. There's a lot of power with this. So then they formalize it, and they take it over as the state, if you will. The Romans embrace it. And then, a couple more 100 years go by, and this thing around the Bible comes around, and these people say it's better. These people disagree. So you have a schism. So you got the Eastern Orthodox Church now, and then you got the Roman Catholic Orthodox Church and their ecosystems of power. And then fast forward another 1,000 years, and you get this dude, Martin Luther, coming along and being like, fuck you guys, we should be able to read the Bible. We can now get access to it because of the Gutenberg Press. And he 95 thesis against the door and is like, this shit's available to everyone. And then Protestantism basically happens, right? And then it gets to the States, and then freaking evangelicalism begins to happen. Like, this church is always evolving, people. Like, it's never been a consistent thing. And there's the next evolution that's going to happen.
Well, I mean, in a way, the 5 of us are a church right here.
Right.
I mean, what's brought us together is that
in his name, you will experience his power.
Well, I mean, I'm not talking about that thing.
I'm joking, man. I'm joking.
I'm talking about we're all here because we've shared similar life experience.
Exactly.
Right? Even though we're all, different people, but, and then so I can see not really an organization, but people coming together on shared similar life experiences that revolve around psychedelics for sure. you know, but then how do you stop that from becoming divisive, you know, like between other groups, other religions, you know what I mean? Like, you know, people who don't have this type of experience, because it seems like, you know, history has proven that that's what's going to happen next.
I think you simply don't do anything about it. I think this is a medicine much more powerful, and I with our limited minds, we can't even do anything with it. Our systems might be something that are intellectual design, but the medicines are more intuitively designed, and it's pure consciousness at that part, and it's not a game the ego will understand, neither know how to play. So I think that's where we would end as humans, trying to control things and let go. There will
So
be a point of collectively, get crossing over that. But yeah, Jason.
So try this one on. I'm curious what you guys think about this. If we were talking about earlier that this stuff is a technology, right? We talked about that it holds an intelligence. At some point, do we just step back and actually trust that this intelligence will evolve us the way that it needs to evolve without being attached to thinking that it's got to look a specific way? Because if we go at the Stone Ape theory, at some point, the evolution took place. They started to talk, change happened. The technology was in control. The intelligence was in more control than the users. So at some point, do we trust that that there's a bigger thing happening than we'll ever understand?
Yes, I think, at least personally from my experience, I let go of all the desire to control my life, and that alone I would try to expand to every other individual, and I think that's how it happens. Just that intelligence is something that is going to take care of everything. It's always been there. It is pre-existence, right? It's the unmanifested. That's what I believe. So it's taking care of everything, and yeah, we can let go happily.
Like, how do
I trust it. I trust it, but I mean, that doesn't mean that everybody else will.
Right.
Well, I heard a story one time. It's like this, like, have you ever driven down like a crazy windy mountain road and it's raining, and the only thing that's like, you're in your car and the only thing that separates you from the other lane is like these divided little lines, right? Like, there's a real chance you can come around a blind curve and some car could hit you, like at any point in time, right? So if you know that there's a really good chance that someone could be drunk driving and someone could just come across that little yellow line and kill you, what gives you the courage to get in the car every day? Like, you just have to trust, right? You have to trust that no one's going to come in the other lane and kill you. How do you go outside every day and know that you're not going to be the victim of a violent shooting? You just got to trust.
Well,
How do you know that your wife is not going to go sleep with somebody else? You got to trust. Like, I think that's the very
Well,
foundation of everything, right? Like, you just got to trust. But look at us.
Well,
Like, how are we all together right now? Is it just some coincidence that all of us share like a lot of passions about things? Is it just coincidence that we're coming together, and while we have some differing opinions, like, we all want to talk to each other? Like clearly, in my opinion, there's something that is the same way that the vine outside on my palm tree produces a flower that opens up at a 45-degree angle on July 27th, is the same way that we're coming together. Like, we're growing together the same way that a tree grows leaves, the same way that an apple tree grows apples. So too are we building something and not even knowing what our final destination is. But yeah, I think you have to trust. And once you begin not trusting, that's when you begin losing your way. That's when you begin getting foggy and second guessing and having anxiety and being trapped in the past and having depression or having anxiety. If you just believe, like, if you know and you work towards this thing that you feel, you're going in the right direction. So I would answer yes, there is an intelligence, and you're tapping into it when you believe in yourself. Even when no one else believes in you, that's when you have to believe in yourself the most. I would agree with you, Jason. That's what I think.
There are no coincidences.
Yeah, a coincidence is what you have when you apply a bad theory. Right? That's a coincidence. Maybe you don't have all the facts.
Yeah,
Still not a coincidence.
Right.
it's perceived
Yes.
that way. Yeah, objectively, there is just simple cause and effect.
So if that's the case, then I feel like when we have these conversations about what's happening in the psychedelic space, there's almost this like, do I trust other individuals who are working with this same thing to be working towards the higher good, even if I don't understand it or I disagree with it, or they're doing a church, or right? It's like, if I trust me and we can trust a collective here, can I trust others? I don't know. That's sometimes a hard question to think about.
But I think, as George said about the traffic, right? We trust the other people too when we take our car to drive, right? It has become we don't think about driving when we go driving. It has become a natural aspect if most of us are driving for so long. But each second there is a risk involved, right? Anyone can make a stupid decision, but the trust is there. And some of it comes from the belief that people follow rules, because I don't think in India people follow rules, and I don't have that much trust. And I'm telling you, I can't drive in India now. I will suck at it. I'll get killed or I'll kill someone in minutes. So yeah, it's about, you want to add these flexible rules, a ground to begin the journey. It shouldn't be limiting, yet it should be providing the structure on which the collective experience and growth can happen.
Yeah, well put, Ranga.
Yeah, well said, Ranga. I think there's something to be said about motivation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding the motivation, I think we have to step back and reflect upon society. And typically the grand motivator in society is monetary, instruments. When we're talking about like the trust of, getting out and going driving, there's a risk and reward factor there. And, the reward is we're obligated to actually go do this, because we have jobs, we have needs, we have grocery stores that have to happen. So we're willing to assume the risk. So I think, when we're looking at this, I think there's a few more perspectives that do shed some light on this as well. I had another point, but I forgot it. So
I love that.
Can I just pitch in this part where you said about money, right? I think that whole aspect will change with the collective evolution that's happening at the conscious level, because money is nothing but the cash we carry. It's a promise to pay. Because of our lack of trust, we need to give a piece of paper, right? Now that's collectively understood as, it has a real point to it, but it doesn't exist. It's a collective thing we carry in our head, but it's just a promise to pay, right? And it's interchangeable, right? Barter is much more, I would say, based on what I understand, it's much more difficult to transact in some ways. But I guess with psychedelics and lessing of our desires, I think we could go revisit barter one more time when humans are population reduces, I guess.
I don't, in terms of the barter system, I think it's probably better to classify everything in like the free market system. So I think without the free market, we really don't have society. That's kind of foundational to what we have. That you grow supply chains that allows, us the transfer of information, the extraction of resources, and onward and onward. So, yeah, I forgot my point again. Damn it!
It's interesting.
Are you drinking beer, Ben?
No, I'm not. That's my problem.
Oh, that's the problem. Yeah.
I'm tired. I went for a long run today, and I'm just exhausted.
Ranga and I were talking a little bit earlier via text message, and he had some interesting ideas about models, unconscious bias, and self-fulfilling prophecy. What do you want to share with us, Ranga, about that?
I think that's what we've been talking about for so long. I think we just didn't label the conversation. If you see
It's true.
What structure or system we are working on, those are the models we use, and why we are doing it a particular way, and people restricting other people to not consume or participate in this ceremony. That there is a lot of unconscious bias, right? Deciding without knowing why we are deciding to not participate in a psychedelic trip, right? And most of the things, I feel like the chicken egg scenario, which came first in evolution, I don't need to know. What the psychedelics does is give you the power to decide whatever you want. So you make the first move with the world, or it's like a loop you create. If you're not aware of the loop, whatever you're afraid of will fulfill itself. right? I just you said those 3 words and I had to give something. I just felt
For
like
each of
it
them.
for each of them, right?
Well done.
But I think that's what I'm every day thinking about. Each time I get frustrated, right? So what model was I using? Because I'm definitely incorporating something which says I need I'm not welcoming something in from the situation that is happening right now. So what model, and that goes along with the bias that I carry, right? This is causing I'm deciding I'm gonna be angry at a subconscious level. So when I get frustrated, I'm able to look at the subconscious level and see, okay, this is what I'm doing. And it's not always easy or straightforward. You do a lot of forth and back, right? And I think you're when I joined the podcast, Benjamin was saying about the radicalization, and I think that just happens because this consciousness is exploring, right? And it seems the analogy that comes to my mind is like this pendulum, right? There is it just the whole act of it is to pass through the center, so it's going to go to the extreme and come back, and it's the journey of it. So that happens with our collective ideas, right? We go too much with something, right? And for example, it even happened with my exploration in drugs or stuff, because I was kept tight because of the traditions and culture back in India. And when I was let out, yeah, I got radicalized. I went to the other extreme where I tried without fear, not with trying part. It's like, oh, I get to try, so I'm just gonna get lost in this kind of, right? And that's gonna happen.
Like a girl in Catholic school. Let me ask you this. Like, so when we talk about models and psychedelics, like I think we all share some similar foundations, and I'm curious if our models going forward are the same future. So, Jason, what, like, if you were to look into your crystal ball, how do you see, like, if you were just spitballing and working on the models that you've seen in your experiences, how do you see the world of psychedelics shaking out over the next 10 years?
So actually, more often than not, I see a darker path. And I see one where we continue to explore with these chemicals, and we discover one, that is either synthesized, that science has created, that is able to create an experience or a healing or a medicine that basically people can control. You're talking about monetary being the main driver. I think behind that is actually power, like real power. And I think why we're seeing a little bit of a rise of what's happening is because those that are in power are like, okay, great. Yeah, you can say now it's going to heal PTSD and anxiety and depression and mental health. We realize society is at a breaking point right now. So we're going to go ahead and give away a little bit of this power. But behind that is really, as things get further developed around, AI, virtual reality, creating these technological spaces that we can drop into, that paired with a psychedelic experience, all of a sudden begins to feel like you really are living in a virtual reality, right? I mean, think about, like, if that's really the tool that allows you to drop in to an experience that's unlike anything you've ever felt, that would be pretty freaking sellable, and a lot of power and a lot of influence, and a lot of our minds could be kind of subjected to that. So I don't know. I don't unfortunately trust enough of the human race, enough of the people that are out there that this could end up. And again, that's a pretty dark perspective, but like that's one. Like I was at South by Southwest in Austin this last year, and it was the first time they had a psychedelic track, and I was hanging out with some people that were talking about some pretty gnarly stuff. Like there's some, there's that underbelly, and it was kind of turned me off a little bit. I'm like, that's not the magic I've experienced, or what the part of the realm I want to play with. But I don't know. That's the one that kind of, I think, is where I think it could be an interesting path.
What kind of dark stuff were they sharing?
Just the amount of money that was getting funded to go after and start researching new chemicals. I mean, like a lot of money, and there are a handful of people that are really driving it. And again, that centralized like power, like there's a lot of control that could be given. And we're, already on a path of wanting to give up control as a society, right? Like that's just very much the personal individual, authority is getting more and more taken away. So all of a sudden, if they can normalize this psychedelic thing the way that it has been, I could see it shifting to that. So just that, and then also virtual reality, the merging of virtual reality and psychedelics. Like that was a really important conversation.
Yeah.
I think
Interesting.
given that I'm brown colored, and if let's say 200 years back I was born in some caste, right? My caste in India, right? My life could have been just so narrowed. Coming from that, I have this opportunity, right? Like to be able to speak about whatever, right? For me, it's that change, right? So for me, future seems bright because of the immediate bad things that has happened, and I think it goes up and down, more like in a cycle, right? So things are gonna be really bad. What's this line that I wanted to say? Strong times create weak people. Weak people create tough times. Tough times create strong people. Strong people create easy times, right? And it goes like that. And we see how much we want to see, and there is always all possibilities, right? It could be as dark as it can get, but again, it just becomes a new beginning for some other species.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben, what do you think? Are we headed for some dark times? Like, what do you see on the horizon for the world of psychedelics and the world in general?
Well, I think we are heading for some dark times, unfortunately. Yeah, I had an experience a long time ago, and I've had a couple kind of ideas about this. In fact, my journal this morning was all about how my whole path and all of this. But being able to, kind of see future events based upon what's happening in the now, and being able to kind of what I call read the wind, which what Ranga was referring to as we first started this podcast. I don't see us getting too far past 2026 without some pretty massive consequences and calamity. I also see on the other side of that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of hope, but I think we're going through probably a pretty dark time before we get to see that sunshine again.
It's the cocooning which we needed. Don't be afraid of the cocoon.
Yeah, it seems that, as I'm sitting here looking at my library, it seems like a lot of the best literature was written in dark times. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. You know what I mean? Like there's all this, that's really when people begin to show who they are. They say circumstances don't make a man, they reveal him. And a lot of times we don't even know who we are until we're faced with a tragedy where we have to make a choice, because when you're comfortable, you don't really have to make too many sacrifices. And sometimes I think that maybe that is what the psychedelic resurgence is doing right now, is preparing people for some times that could be difficult. When I look at, I've been talking a lot about this book, The Island, that was written by Aldous Huxley. And it was written 60 years ago. And in that book, he's talking about people using mushrooms. And if, it seems to me like maybe, I think there's a lot of evidence to support that psychedelics have been used in the mystery schools or in churches for people to come up with different ideas for a long time. And it's kind of been something that's been withheld from the public, not completely exiled. Like you could find it out on your own if you know what you're looking for. But I think that these types of drugs have been used throughout history to help people garnish change and create change. And for all I know, like there could be other drugs out there that people are using that enhance your intelligence even more. Like if you look at, there was a few years ago, there was a big boom in nootropics like paracetam, phenylparacetam, and tianeptine, and all these drugs that have existed for, I don't even know, they existed for like 30 or 40 years. Like, and like Jason was saying, there's tons of medical advancements that's not really out there for everybody. Like think about like Rogan, like that guy takes like 40 different things, and how many people in his circle are just taking the needle where they're getting like testosterone or HGH. And I take HGH in like a powder form, and I can totally feel a difference in the way I think and how I look at the world in a more positive bent. Like, what happens if those people stop taking that drug? They're going to age immediately. There's all kinds of technologies. Like Peter Thiel has a company where the company is based on blood. And they did these tests in mice where they took the blood from young mice and injected it into old mice. And those old mice began acting like young mice. And the young mice, they put the old blood in and they began acting all, all jacked up. If you look at Ray Kurzweil, that guy goes and gets his blood clean like twice a week. That guy doesn't look his age, and then, so Peter Thiel started a company where he'll have young men come in and get their blood drawn, and then he'll take it. And in a weird sort of way, isn't that like a vampire? Like, in a weird sort of way, like, isn't that the story of a vampire from 1,000 years ago? Like, it's weird to think about these technologies, like, soma and vampires, mushrooms, and this new thing, like, it blows my mind to think what is already in front of us that we don't know about. I would venture to say that there's tons of drugs out there that make people younger, that make people smarter, that make people more agile. A lot of the work they're doing with Alzheimer's are drugs to make you cognitively stronger. That's kind of what they're researching. And if you want to take it even one step deeper, like, look at the medical experimentation that's going on right now in front of us. Just wide open, friggin' might as well be Mangala out there doing experiments, and it's accepted. Like, hey, take your kid down here, try out this thing, man. Hey, go down there. We're gonna put some graphene in here and see what happens. Can you get the signal now? Like, there's wide open experimentation, and not enough people are talking about it, man.
Yeah, well, that was one of my first remarks when it all went down. They're like, oh, by the way, we got this new vaccine with this new technology. And I was like, wait a second, that was pretty quick. And then, you heard about the immunity for the pharmaceutical companies because, they're doing all the work to roll it out so fast and all these other things. And then the billions of people that they plan to give it to. And I was like, wait a second, we're doing a mass experiment on the human population? And nobody's talking about that?
I know.
All right. Okay. I mean, it's a pretty wild thing. It's unprecedented as far as I'm aware of. That's for sure.
Well,
sorry, go ahead, Jason. What do you got?
I was just going to say, I think there's the reality is whatever shift is going to happen. And I agree. I think, something that we're going to see happen in the next several years, some pretty significant structures falling, and that's going to be difficult. But those of us that have been on the path, that have been going through an awakening, that have been tapping into, like, I really believe that we're going to be able to weather this by stepping into that inner authority that has been awoken through these medicines or these magic or whatever side of it is that we're on, and that we're going to be able to help be that part that ushers the new reality forward. But I think there's also going to be a lot of people that are lost in the darkness, and they're going to it's going to be difficult. But I think that's the hope that I have. And that's actually where it's like, I actually can look ahead and be like, all right, I'm ready for this. Like, let's do this. Like, yeah, it's going to friggin' suck, but it'll be really interesting to watch something new get built. Like, that's going to happen in our lifetime. Something new is going to emerge, and we're going to see that happen in the next 20 to 30 years. Like, think about that journey. Like 30 years from now, we're like the old shamans being like, hey, bitches, you want to know? Like, we'll help you on some level, right? Like, we went through that. We evolved, and we're going to bring that forward. And that's exciting, honestly, to me at the end of the day to think about.
It's interesting. It's almost like you have to put on the armor of God. But like, I see it. What do you think? What?
I was going to say, or start integrating mushrooms every day to figure out what that armor actually looks like.
Yeah, I think it's the armor of mycelium that maybe, like us growing together. I almost see, I think it might even happen sooner. I almost see it like Generation X as a bridge between the boomers and then the younger generation. Like, there's such a divide between those two groups. And it's like, Generation X is like the last generation to know what it's like to not have the internet. It's like the last generation to, like, have the telephone where you couldn't take it outside with you, and to not be connected. So I think that there's a responsibility as a bridge there. But yeah, I do see something being built, and I think we're kind of the foundation of that building. And maybe you're right. Maybe we are the antidote to the darkness that's coming our way. On some level, when I look at the experimentation, like like I saw this really interesting panel from like the Milken Institute, and it was all these scientists, and they were talking about doctors, and they were talking about the problem with modern medicine is that we can't move forward because it's way too slow. By the time we figure something out, it's already like by the time we figure out like how to fix something, it's already been 100 years. And this was prior to the Great Plague, but they were talking about how we need to speed up the process of medicine and how we need to move things faster. And like on some level, they made these really elegant arguments for experimenting on people that are like, look, these people are going to die. Like it's super dark, but if you think about it from a strictly, species-centric and intellectual point of view, like, look, these people are all going to die. They're all in their 60s. They're like morbid obese. Why are we not trying this stuff on them? Like it's irresponsible for us to not try this stuff on them. And like it was a really interesting conversation, and none of them were wearing swastikas, but it seemed like in some ways. I don't know. On some level, you can see that though, right? Like, am I wrong to say that on some level we should be trying out drugs on people? Paul, what do you think? Or what do you got, Ben?
It's not like we have not done that, right?
We haven't stopped doing it, I don't think.
Yeah, we've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Whether it's been like STDs and experiments with different types of drugs on, prostitutes or black people in America or whatever it may be, we've been doing that. But only then we weren't asking their permission.
We have to come with a label, right? You can test the lower life forms to help higher life forms. There has to be some kind of standard, right? But the question for me, it's always the question of like what makes this one life valuable than the others. That's where you have to be purely intellectual, rational, and logical. But I don't think it's from the wisdom side. It doesn't make sense to me. Where do we draw the line to make this one life better than the other? It's how do you judge, right?
You make it a free choice, and it's an application like an Uber, and you could just sign up to be a part of human experimentation.
I'm just not talking about humans.
Yeah, it's like being an organ donor.
Yeah. You just have an app, you pull it out, and you're like, okay, I'll do this experiment. Yeah, I'm fat. I can qualify for that experiment. You have all your details in there, and you can make money just being a human lab rat.
That's what we do with our data every day.
Yeah, take the veneer off the damn thing and let people have a choice for it.
I bet you a lot of people would sign up for it. Like, I mean,
you would. Then the ethical argument is are those people of sound mind to actually, make that judgment call for themselves? And then this winds us eventually back to the question of, should people be ruled?
I'm sorry, Ben, what was that? Should people be ruled?
Yeah, ultimately it'll wind us up back there, because is it my choice if I want, even if you feel I'm compromised, it's still my choice to go off and do whatever I want to do. If I want to be a human lab rat, why can't I?
I just think it this way. If I was born before the time fire was invented, right, I wouldn't know about fire. It simply wouldn't exist. Likewise, I think I'm caught up in this time frame with this certain amount of intelligence where there is this tension between individual freedom and then collective ruling. One seems easier. Both have advantages, but I feel like my intelligence at least hasn't gotten outside of it to encompass what it is and what is a better method, because you see, either way, it seems, as Jason said, we would be heading into dark times. You give power to the individual. Yeah, it might happen. And if you see it at a state level, which has been the case, that's also heading into something, right? And I think that's something that I still don't comprehend or understand,
Yeah. Do they ultimately end up at the same spot?
Yeah, I think so. Silence inside me, which is nice.
Well, we're all here to observe so we can pull the proper pieces out of each of these systems and build back something better. Not to steal a phrase or anything.
But see, that's the part I've still not gotten. Trying to become wiser, trying to understand what wisdom is, in the sense that I read this quote where this guy says, person has understood a bit of meaning of life when he plants a seed uh, under which shade he's not going to sit, right? So whenever I'm still caught up in very much a selfish tendency of my life, right? So I question, better for whom? You know, better for future, but it's still not better for a lot of us here on earth. You know, when we were saying heading into the dark times, again I'm going back there because this group, that conversation might apply, but if you ask the person, kids in Syria, or the girl who got stoned or killed in the police brutality for not wearing a hijab, that's pure dark times for them. I know I drifted off a little, but I just realized it's still, you know, I always have this question. Sorry for expanding on that, but why do we what motivates us to spend more on space research and future instead of using that money to help the current, whatever the world scenario? How do we make the choice?
Well, I think a lot of that choice comes from because like attracts like, and money seeks money, just like power seeks power. And so they've identified that, you know, if you can capture an asteroid rolling around the asteroid belt, a couple $1 trillion worth of natural resources on it, now all of a sudden you can use that asteroid and use those resources and gain advantage in that whole system of things. So, I think when you're asking like, how do you switch something like that, you have to fundamentally change the motivations of society. We have to, the motivations to have all of these, all of this for-profit business that just kind of, is a race to the bottom at the end of the day, that eventually is going to race us directly to the bottom. And if we don't figure out how to make adjustments, that is going to end up as our fate. And, George asked, do those two paths kind of end up the same way? I think, yes is the answer to that question, because fundamentally, foundationally, the society that we're talking about is still powered by this monstrosity mechanism of money. And I think until we figure out how to make a significant change in that regard, which I think there's ideas to do so, we're not going to be able to affect any sort of lasting or long-standing change. And that's why I think conversations like these are very important, because that's where we can start to lay these future foundations, or, maybe very soon in the future foundations, to have this set the stage for the next level of these conversations, these talks. When more people get interested in this, when more people wake up and look around the world and say, "Holy crap, the train's about to go off the cliff. What can I do?" And oh, look, there's people who have been talking about this. There's people who might have answers to these questions. And so I don't think you're going to convince top down this system to change. It has so much momentum built up, and it has so much self-identified purpose, that to change its course is an act in absurdity, I think, or to attempt to change its course is an act in absurdity.
Education.
Yeah. It'll help, but at the end of the day, looked at the numbers of education. You got 50% with sixth grade education, 18% illiterate just in the United States. Solving that is a monumental task in and of itself.
I think there's two ways people change, and there's two ways societies change. One is through inspiration, and one is through desperation. And there's not a whole lot of inspiration out there when you look at people who are leaders. There's not a whole lot of inspiration when you look at education. There's not a whole lot of inspiration except for the True Life podcast.
Ooh, now that's a plug, folks. That's a plug.
Didn't see that coming.
The problems, like we have problems right now that money can't fix. Like money can't solve the problems that are devastating the planet. Money can't solve the problems that are ruining relationships. And so we need another sort of medium to solve these problems. And maybe that's where the psychedelics come in. Maybe getting back to what Jason was saying, I think that, you have to trust in yourself and trust in who you believe. Maybe Jason, it sounded like when you had spoke about trust, you said that there are some people that you can't trust. Who are the people you can't trust? And like, what were you driving at when you had spoke about that?
No, I think it's just on the whole that we can't like, I don't trust power on some levels, right?
Right.
I don't trust the energy, and again, it's never about the individual, and it's interesting. I think sometimes this is also one of the most misunderstood elements of sin, if you want to look at it, especially from a Christian perspective or the Christ perspective, was that sin was an individual situation. And the reality is it was always seen as corporate, never as the individual. So this idea of sin, greed, power wasn't about the individual. It was about a corporate level of a society that was driven by those things. That was, quote unquote, sinful. And I think you can see the ramifications of a society that is driven by those things, the way that it destroys, right? I just heard some stat the other day, something like, I want to say 70%, but that feels so high, but I feel like it was 70% of species have extinct within the last 100 years. 70%. That's insane. Like, and like, you look at the why, it's like, well, like you look at the power structures, you look at the ways that we're destroying this earth, that feels sinful, quote unquote, right? Like, that's not goodness. That's not like creating life. And so on some levels, Gaia is going to call some people out on that situation, right? And I think we're going to see that the earth is going to kind of start to revolt a little bit because of the power structures have gotten just a little too big. And I do believe in that kind of self-correction of the universe. But yeah, I can't trust sometimes those bigger systems and those institutions. Again, it's never about the individual. I think anytime we look at the individual, and we love this in media, we always drive things, we try to tie it to the individual. So-and-so is so horrible for this, and so-and-so is that. Like, it's never that, right? There's something always much bigger going on in the background. And that's really what we have to awaken to.
You know, this reminds me of the dialogue from The Dark Knight. You die a hero or live long to see yourself become villain. It's just enough time witnessing activities that are happening on Earth. You genuinely want to just ending this would be much better. You get into this, at least I get into this super villain thing. And it makes sense. It's not me or the world, it's the interaction, and it has nothing to do with any individual. When money is involved, when power is involved, that's what I think. There is a saying from Tamil, it's always the chair, right? The position, the seat of power, that's going to be the corrupt. And it takes a lot of effort to not let it affect you, right? And I think that's why one of the reasons psychedelics should be, along with when people use Bible to say their vows, right, before taking up positions of justice or whatever. It's also now goes with the ayahuasca brew. They take this and they're like, yep, I know what I need to do. This is not my individual game like I'm playing anymore,
Yeah, I wonder if the structure changed, if that would change the ideologies, if like the structure of the way we live, if it wasn't, I don't know how to get out of it. Go ahead.
Well, underlying structures influence everything around us. So, for instance, your eye color is because of the structure of your eyes it reflects that color, and it's the actual physical structure inside your eyes that actually create that color. So it's the underlying structures that really kind of create the manifestations that are out in the world.
Okay, what if this, like, so there's been over the last 10 years, there was this big hoopla and this big thing about people changing their pronouns, right? Like you can be they, or you can be us. Like, what if we just change the definition of some words? Like, might it be that easy just to change definitions of words to fundamentally change society? Like, what if we changed what if we changed the word work into vacation? Like, oh, I'm going to go to work today. Yeah. And you get paid for that. Like, maybe that's kind of far out there, but you see what I'm saying? Like, we could change the definition of some words and fundamentally change the way society works. And it wouldn't take money. It would just take people abiding by these new words that were already in the lexicon. Like what are you getting sued means you give me money. Oh, you're going to sue me? Thanks. How much are you going to sue me for? Fantastic.
Well, then
we've changed that word.
The powers that be would make vacation crappy.
But it would take them a while because we would just keep changing the word. Like, you know what I mean? At some point, you could change the world by changing the language that's already out there.
You could, but and people try to do this. But the thing is after you change it, people just find another word to associate with whatever reality was actually taking place. Work would just become vacation, so the context and connotation of vacation would change. Well, I think it's not changing the definition of words. I think it's changing how the words we use will then change how our reality is defined.
Give me an example of that.
Well, no absolutes, for instance. So good plug. So the idea, if you look at everything from a perspective of no absolutes, all of a sudden you're no longer attached to a certain ideal, a certain perspective, a certain fact, a certain number, a certain statistic. You now have given yourself the mental ability to walk around those barriers simply by choosing the words of looking at the world through the perspective of no absolutes. So, it's the words that we choose. This is actually going to be my second book. It was No Absolutes, Words for Life or something like that, or Language for Life. There you go. That's the title. And so the idea is that the words that we use, we can change those, right? But, going out and trying to change everybody else's definition of something is kind of, you're going to get back and forth and blow back, and eventually, it will change whatever definition you changed. The reality that's happening in the world will just shift to a different word. But if we change the words that we use, we can navigate around those barriers.
I think we got to look at structures, though, like you were saying a minute ago, Ben. Like, your eyes are the color they are due to the structure, right? Our understanding of money, at least in North America, and the way that we've seen it play out in the economy is because the structure it was built upon was effectively death, right? And the Federal Reserve and how, like, that idea. So you can't just start saying, oh, well, I think you see this too with crypto, and I'd be curious on your thoughts on this, Ben, but like the idea, like, oh yeah, crypto's money. And like that doesn't make sense. It's because it's really not money. It's a completely different way of understanding the blockchain and everything that's around it. So it's not money. It's something new. It's something different. And so how much of if we really want to change something, you have to look at the structure, and you have to rework the structure. And out of the reworking of the structure, a new language develops. Or does the language shift the structure? I guess it's the chicken and egg, but I'm curious on your thoughts on that, Ben.
Both can be true, right? But in the instance of like crypto and money, it's a different. So, if you just confine it to the chicken and the egg, that's going to be, you only have a choice, a 0 and a 1. Mm-hmm. But if you look at like the money situation, you can stand back and you can say, oh, it's not actually. Money is not what we're looking at. We're looking at a different system of economics.
Yes.
Right. And money is just a term that we use to kind of facilitate, trade between people in transactional relationships. And it's debt based in this, in this system that we have. And what that debt based system is essentially, you just keep printing money. And you're battling your constant inflation up and down, so and so. In the crypto side of things, and it's not true for all cryptos, because some cryptos have adopted that set of economic systems. But for Bitcoin, for instance, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. That's a hard number. You can't just go off and add zeros to that. So now, instead of having a debt-based system that you could just continue printing zeros onto that, now you have kind of a built-in utility to that system where it kind of turns into a store of value. Because even if there's 33 million millionaires on the planet right now. So if all of them wanted a Bitcoin tomorrow, they couldn't have it. So there's a scarcity aspect in there. And so, it starts to get into, what we define, as economics then, and the actual pieces of those systems. And I think, when we start to be serious about those conversations, there are certain aspects of that. And that's like why Bitcoin was such an interesting experiment, and still is because it took pieces of those conversations, not just about economics, but about society, and then, selfish actors and kind of took the game theory aspect of what we saw happen in the past, and then figured out a way to balance that equation, in this mechanism. And so I think, that's the recipe for what we're going to see be successful in the future. Is we're going to see the conglomeration of all of this access of data, all of this information that we now have, at our fingertips, all these conversations now happening. We're going to see these systems just get built and evolve and pull the good ideas and be done with the bad ideas.
I think you're going to see, like, when that begins to happen, it reshapes work. I'm really curious to see how that's always going to come, because we realize we don't work for this debt-based system of needing money to pay off the stuff. Now, all of a sudden, the way we start to work completely shifts. And I think that's another structure that is on the edge of really cracking. And I think work from home stuff pushed it to a level that's like, it's really going to be interesting to see what comes out of our perceptions of work.
Right. And I think so. We're already seeing it, but you're seeing people are waking up. They're saying, well, I want individual wealth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want money. I want wealth. And those are two very different things. And a lot of people who want that don't even understand the difference of those things. Right. Because you're not taught the difference of those things in any school system that I'm aware of in this country. And very few people actually will educate you on how to build individual wealth. But because of the advent of these things, like in the gig economy, now you're seeing the ability for people to leverage their time to build that individual wealth, even if they don't understand, the greater economics at play here. And so we're just seeing that decentralization of work. And that's going to be a stepping stone into the next iteration of what we call businesses and community and eventually society. That's kind of what my Terra Libre project is kind of on the path of.
Yeah, that's awesome. You kind of touched on this, but like that's what we're seeing now is like, because there are people from working home, there is a fundamental breakdown in monetary systems around the world. And you could argue that what's happening in the Ukraine and Europe is a fight for resources before they have the new economy, because regardless of what kind of digital currency you have, resources are still going to be worth having.
Resources. Commodities are still commodities. How you settle those transactions, well, I mean, it kind of does matter. If you look at like the big numbers, financial transactions, the financial services market accounts for 23% of all of the revenue in the world. That used to be a big fat zero when it was all controlled. Back in like the kerosene days, the Rockefeller days, things like that, it was all commodities. And if you own the mining stations, the refineries, the distribution, all of that was all tied to commodities. Now you have this financial services type thing. So, I mean, yes and no, a little bit, I guess.
Do you think that's what's... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Might be a little drift off, but it reminds me of that Fight Club's dialogue, right? Advertising as us chasing cars and shit that we don't need with money we don't have, right? So we are now gonna, if we replace money along with this whole idea of advertising or making people buy so that you can have a living, the whole aspect of, I don't see sales in a very positive light, because I feel like marketing is good. It's about raising awareness that a product like that exists, but sales crosses a line for me in my head, right? So those kind of things will change into more, I don't want to call it necessary things, but at least more things that will make us more alive or appreciate, be grateful for being alive.
What kind of things what kind of things?
So in the sense that, consider something like art, which is not, in some sense you can say it's a most unproductive thing, because productive is sense of a measure. Right now, we have so many things that we are not able to measure. Maybe we won't ever be able to measure, such as what we feel inside, right? We can come up with close approximation. I think that's why those words are there, close approximations of what we feel inside, right? And I'm sorry, I lose my thought there. I can't
No,
think of the particular example that yeah, I feel like if people are not compelled to do things because they are given this framework of this is what you need to buy, this is chasing the American dream, basically, right? If there is no American dream, people could do nothing, and eventually they will come across stuff they are passionate about, right? And then things happen out of love rather than. Right now there is only a bit of a mismatch, the dissonance between what people want to do and what they are doing, right? It's like this everyone wants to sit in the next chair, you just have to move them, but in order to move them, you just need to create this space where they can understand it's as simple. If I stop chasing going to this particular thing that I don't need to do, the same is going to be done for the position that I am chasing after. Most passionate people don't get into things that they can because someone else who is not passionate is there because of status game, right? So those aspects can change, right? Where people do what they do, and there is always opportunity, right? There won't be competition, at least the way it is right now.
Right.
yeah.
I think that's a potential reality for sure. And I think that is directly a reflection of the structure that you put that underlies all of that. I think you can accomplish that, by taking a communal type idea and merging it with a business type idea and providing the things that everybody, has to go out and seek to provide for their family. But if that was provided, because we do have technology that allows us to automate a lot of these things. We do have technology that allows us to, have renewable resources for a good chunk of this stuff. And we're just at the right perfect time where you have access to these things at an affordable rate to actually implement these experiments and ideas. But I think if you can create that type of structure, that type of foundational environment, that's where you get these results. That's where you get that the reality born into the world.
Maybe we're just now achieving a level of consciousness where people can do what they want. Maybe if we look back at the world as a system and we say, look, all this negativity, all this war, all this stuff was necessary to get us here. And maybe like if you look at the way society has been run, it's been run somewhat for the last 200 years of industrialization. It's kind of been run in an authoritarian way with like a whip, like get to work. We got to fix this thing. It's got to start running good. And
Faster,
you got
harder.
you got to feed people drugs to get them fired up, to get them in there, to start working on the wheel. And you got to get them in there and keep them in there. But maybe now, the same way that the earth causes a virus to bring down the population of rabbits when they make too much, so too has man created a virus to slow down this machine to let us bloom in a way. Like maybe it's because we've had this hard stop. It's not so much of a hard stop and like, maybe it's necessary. Maybe this is part of the program. This hard stop, this hard reset is because we're moving into another phase where we're going to become more of the flower than we are the vegetative stage. Like all plants grow vegetative and then they flower. Maybe that's where we're at right now. Maybe we are cut like the corn coming out of the husk, so too are we beginning to show ourselves. And I use the metaphor of the butterfly or the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. And I think Ranga even today was talking about the cocooning. Like maybe we are just beginning to emerge as a new form, and these new ideas that we've had right here, be it cryptocurrency or be it the Terra Libre project, maybe these new ideas are us reaching through the broken chrysalis and testing the environment. Like, hey, what is this? This is weird. Hey, maybe we don't need, what is money? Oh yeah, money was just something we needed in the cocoon. Money was what we had that the umbilical cord was feeding us, but we no longer need that. Let's detach the umbilical cord and let's test out this thing called an arm. Like, what is this thing, And maybe it's so difficult for us to understand because we've never, at least our particular time have never been part of what's happening. And that would go right back to what Jason said about, hey, we're building something new. And on some level, we all know it. Like Jason just came out and was like, look, we're going to be building this new thing. Like, how did you know that, Jason? Like, how did you know we were doing that? Like, where did you, like that knowledge was given to you, or you had it in your genetic code, or somehow you knew we're doing this. And I think other people feel that. Like, we all know something is happening. We all know something is changing. And it's just, like, if we can apply it to as above, so below, it's the cocoon, it's the corn in the husk, it's the flower getting ready to expand, it's the bananas coming out of the sheath, it's us becoming the next version of us. Like Ben says, like, we go around, we don't necessarily repeat, but we rhyme in a helical model. Like, we are at the point where things are about to happen, and there is going to be a great die-off. Like, just it doesn't even need to be nuclear war. The baby boomers are dying, and they're like the biggest part of humankind for the last couple of generations. There was so many of them. And if you just draw it back to the plants, like, the plant needed a lot of nutrients, and now it's dying, and now something new is being born. Like, I can't, like, that comes into my mind so often, and it's frightening. It's scary, but it's beautiful in a way. It's sort of this beautiful tragedy that's going to unfold in front of us. And if you think about it like this, think about a movie that you see or a play that you see. That play is so much like, the only time people stand up and give an ovation is after, like, the bad guy died and that thing that happened, it came through in a way you didn't understand. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, yeah, dude, they found her, you know, I know it. Oh my God. Yeah. I knew that guy was the good guy. Even though I thought he was horrible, I knew it. I could tell deep down. It's that story of the underdog that comes to win at the end. It's the story of the man or woman who had no business being at the top, but somehow made it through perseverance and became the symbol of success for a generation. Like, I think that is what's about to happen to us. And it makes sense, because right now we're in the part of the movie that's super dark. We're like, there's no way out of here, man. Like, we're that Super Bowl team that's in the second half and we're down by 50. Dude, we're dead. There's no way. And the coach comes in. It's like, listen up, boys. How hard has it taken you to get here? We brought in Ranga from India. We got the damn beekeeper from Maui. Jason was part of this church, man. Come on, man. We got Mr. Wizard here.
I'm
There
curious.
are no coincidences.
There aren't. I'm curious. Has anybody gone down the rabbit hole of human design? And like,
You mean like aliens making people?
no, like the actual, like, it's by Ra-U Hara.
No,
And it's the science of definition. All right. If nobody's gone down that rabbit hole, I don't know that I want to open that can of worms. But there's a lot of things that are really fascinating about human design, and some of this, like Ra basically got this download in the 80s over about 10 days and built this an understanding and a structure of things that's pretty freaking insane. I don't know that I prescribed all of it, but I've definitely been going down the rabbit hole with it. And the biggest thing that he talks about is these ages that we've lived in. And we've lived in what he calls the cross of planning has been about the last 400 years. And everything that has been driven throughout the energy of the world has been this energy of planning, right? So whether through those colonization, whether it's through the expanding of the empires, like planning across everything. And basically that cross of planning will end in 2027. And I always get hesitant when people put dates out and they're like, this is going to happen on this day. And I'm like, okay. But so I don't know if I prescribe to all that. But it's interesting because he talks about shifting. And he also talks about a new consciousness coming online called the raves, the RABES, the raves. And the raves will be very similar to us from a consciousness perspective, but they will have a different ability to manifest than we do. That they will be able to literally, like you're talking about, the shift, the flower, this evolution of consciousness, that their understanding to like create what they want to create will come far easier than how we've had to do it through these processes of planning and whatnot. And that when the raves come online, they're going to, it's going to take a while for them to really start to impact society, but it's going to be a new way of thinking that's going to take us to this next place. So anyways.
Are the raves people?
Yeah, they're humans, but
they're humans. I think this reminds me of what Osho calls the new man.
Yes,
right?
very
And
similar.
it sounds very similar in that idea that we are right now manifesting. It's not that we are not manifesting. Whatever
Mhm.
comes as thought, it's converted into action, backed up by plans, and that's what's happening, right? So it is the lack of clarity what to manifest. So all forms of desires are getting manifested, right? So that's where you have uh, let's say rape cases or criminal cases, or even as small as systematic racism or systematic greediness, right? And these things will change
Mhm.
because there will be a clarity to just the intuitive knowing of why I am doing it, right? Because you're always curious, why the fuck am I here in the first place, right? That it never dies. Like I never get bored saying that. Maybe I'm gonna bore you guys, but every single second it comes by, I'm only curious why I'm here, because this just doesn't seem limited to what we are doing right now, just these actions. And I'm curious about just existence itself. And I think that question leads to a clarity. And when Jason described it, Osho's new man came, because that's what it's about. Be a rebel against everything that is there, and then you're gonna have a clarity.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's so basically human design looks at this idea of he brought four different modalities of understanding our unique makeup and design. It was the Kabbalah, it was astrology, it was a Chinese, I can never pronounce it, and then a fourth one that I don't remember. And again, I'm just getting into the rabbit hole, so I'm speaking very like elementary on some levels to these things, but the idea is that with these four different pieces, we're able to really understand the two elements of who we are as people, whether you want to call that ego, true self, false self, whatever. But he talks about we hold an inner design, and then we have our personalities, and that through going through this process, like you can really understand your personality of the conscious mind, and then we can begin to understand our intelligence. And really, the reality again is that our mind is nothing. It thinks it's the driver of this vehicle of our bodies, but our bodies holds the intelligence. Like we hold this incredible intelligence, and we have to be able to understand that the mind is simply nothing more than a passenger. So you're talking about a movie, and this is what triggered it for me, George. Is like he talks a lot about like the thinking mind is nothing more than an ass in a seat watching the movie unfold before it. That's all we are. We're just watching this movie and this Layla and this beautiful play happening right before us. And the problem is when our thinking mind attaches and we're like, holy fuck, she just died. What's going on? Like, this is the worst thing that could have happened. And then we wake up and we're like, oh, like it was just a movie, right? Plato's cave, very similar thinking, right? Where shadows on the wall and there's a whole world that's behind us. Like, so these themes that come up, and I think it's right. Like, this is nothing more than just that we're observing the universe living itself out, and we're participating in that on some levels, but that's it. And so, but when we can start to understand some of that stuff, and that's what he lays out, it gets really interesting.
Yeah, I gotta read this. Like on so many levels, like, okay, so if we stay with that motif a little bit, and there's this thing called gene therapy, right? Like if you want to get gene therapy, you would get a shot like every month or every few months or something like that, and it could change your genes. Is it possible that like if you consume mushrooms like once a month, that you are also genetically engineering yourself? Like that would kind of fit Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory, right? Like if you continue to take this substance that changes your brain or changes your cells in your brain, and you do it frequently, you do it enough, you're going to change yourself forever, right? And if you just look at I mean, that's in a weird way, that's McKenna's stoned ape theory, is that like it helped blow up our brain or whatever. But might that be like, if you just look at the space right now and you look at some of the people talking and writing papers, granted not all of them, but a lot of people in this space are all thinking kind of similar, and a lot of people in this space are beginning to see things like they're growing together the same way mycelium grows. Like it makes me think that maybe like that is the rapes. Maybe you become part of the new consciousness by a natural gene therapy, and that is taking mushrooms. That is taking these psychedelics, because it's fundamentally changing who you are. I got to tell you, like, I think I'm someone totally different than I was 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Like the way I think, the way I interact, like, and And maybe
But
that's the
is your
world change.
personality different, or is your inner intelligence? Is that like really what's different? I think that becomes an important question.
Yeah. How do you define, like, how would you define inner intelligence?
So, I mean, I think it looks at, if you want to, or maybe we look at it through the lens of like the ego and the true self, right?
Okay.
And that the blowing up of what's happening, when we go through this process, we break down our personality on some levels, and we begin to awaken to this deeper knowledge, this deeper intuition, this deeper understanding, this reality that we now can observe in a way, not just when we're high, but like in the everyday.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the thing has shed, but we're maybe more ourselves than we ever were. Not like we only changed to become more of who we are, not less.
That's beautiful. Yes. I think I'm finally becoming who I'm supposed to be.
Yes. What do you think, Ben?
I think part of the path is the merging of the ego and the true self. And I think in doing that,
and
I think in doing that, you wake up and you go, well, yeah, I know my name is Benjamin C. George, and that's been my name the entire life. But that's not who I am anymore. And when you have that day of awakening, you know it. And I've been on that day with quite a few people, and they know it too. And then the next step in that path, that particular path, is finding out who you are, why you're here, what's your purpose. Because there are no coincidences, and I'm pretty sure we all chose to be here.
100%.
See, that's the part, George. You said about becoming who we are, right? And one of the things that happened to me on this, same as Benjamin said, like my name. Yeah, this is the name for me, but this is not who I am. I'm not limited by this. But along with that goes the desire to be affected. No, not desire. Goes the attachment that we are affected by the name. The name can be whatever, right? Same with your conversation the other day with respect to people giving numbers. Yeah, sure, I'm a number, but I'm not that I know. And I am the only one who needs to know that, right? So there is no convincing other people who you are, rather embracing yourself. I think the whole purpose for me in that sense becomes that find who you are, right? You're so busy finding yourself. You don't have to do anything, just find yourself. And I think you do not have time to actually interact in a negative way with environment, because there is no environment. There is just, it's all going to be part of the same thing, right? And psychedelics does that.
Yeah, it's amazing how you can find yourself in other people. You know, that's been a big part of my realization over the last few years, is like everything I see in people is like, and this is so cliche, I talk about this all the time, but it's like, it's a mirror. And like, it's really helped me with my emotional understanding, or my integration of emotions into the whole, is that whenever I feel the emotions pull on me, it used to be, I thought, because of something that happened, whether it was something I did or whether it was something else did. It was a reaction. But now I realize it's just an idea. It is just something to make me aware of myself. Like, the emotions are there to make you aware of yourself. And sometimes those emotions are the mirror in somebody else, or it's something you see in somebody else. Like, for example, if somebody else is yelling at me for something, instead of allowing that emotion to overcome me, I think to myself, like, oh, this is what I sound like sometimes when I'm upset. I should stop that. Or, you know, when someone is acting out in a certain way, I'm like, oh, I bet you they're having problems at home, because that's when I feel that way. You know, and it allows me to not react, but to reach out, if that kind of makes sense. Yeah, it's weird. It's interesting to think of your name or your number or any sort of label as a container that holds you in, instead of it's a limiting belief, right?
The difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that is well put. Gentlemen, we are coming up on this 2-hour mark, and as always, like, we're just starting to get down to the nitty-gritty right here. But I'm getting waved down. I got a 2-hour max before my daughter comes in here and starts smacking me around. So
Love it.
yeah, man. I love talking to you guys. And I love love where the conversations go. I love being around and talking to people and learning and listening, and I feel like we're getting deeper and better with every conversation. So thank you for that. Before we go, let's go around the horn here so people can figure out what you're up to, where they can find you, and what you're excited about. Let's start with Jason. What do you got, buddy?
All right. Jason at experienceintegration.com. Same handle. And the thing that's got me interested is continuing on these conversations, digging. I'm telling you, I've been going down this rabbit hole of human design. I don't know where it's going to lead, but it's been an interesting hole to start doing some digging around. So that's been interesting. That's got my spark right now.
Nice. Ben, what about you, buddy?
BenjaminCGeorge.com for the book, the podcast, which is now out. The first episode happened with George last week. We had some technical difficulties, so there's going to be a version 1.5 coming soon. I'm excited to just keep going down this path. I'd love to have you, Ranga, and you, Jason, and you, Paul, but I don't know if Paul wants to do my podcast.
He might be scared.
Yeah. I'm just joking.
I'm
I'd
down.
love to have you, Paul.
I'd be down.
Cool. I'll contact you guys.
Ranga, where can people find you? What are you excited about, my friend?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm finally we had our first podcast, and we didn't live stream it. We recorded it. At least we got it out. But I was also happy that it was not live streamed because I gotta edit certain things so that I don't get stoned by the Iranian police. So, oops! I didn't give away too much. So we gotta do the edit work here and there to just something seemed like. I still gotta play this game. I have 1 foot in the system to not be killed in one day. So yeah, but
Good
that's it.
for
So
you,
we let
man.
it and release it.
Paul, what do you got? Any final words you want to leave us with, buddy?
No, not really. I'm here on Sundays at 2.
Fantastic. I have I got a myriad of shows coming up. Hopefully with every one of you shortly. And I was telling Ben earlier, I'm excited about, I got a cool author coming up. David Walton, who wrote a book called The Genius Plague. Like, everybody should check it out. It's really good. It encompasses a lot of what we're talking about, but it's built on a fiction foundation, and it talks about the integration of mushrooms into the kind of stoned ape theory, and it's really good. But I got him coming up at the end of the month, and I've got a lot of other interesting people coming in, so stay tuned for that. And great conversation today, guys. I really appreciate it. So thank you for your time. All the links will be in the show notes, and I will talk to everybody next Sunday. Thank you to everyone who joined in and listened to this. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Aloha. All right.
Hui ho.
Yep.